a baby, a wild bobcat, and a moment that defied every instinct and stunned an entire town. What started as a cruel trap in the snow turned into a miracle of trust, healing, and an unbreakable bond between a child and a creature no one dared to understand. This is not just a story, it's a lesson in compassion, courage, and the silent language of the heart. If you believe in second chances, in the power of love to transform even the wildest souls, then stay with us. And before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to Pawprints Forever, like this video, and leave a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from. And of course, share this story with someone who believes animals can change lives. The first scream echoed through the valley just before sunrise. It wasn't a human scream. It was raw, guttural, filled with agony and desperation. The kind of sound that made birds scatter from treetops and made seasoned hunters freeze mid-step. Most people in the small mountain town of Birch Hollow were still sleeping when it happened. Most, except for Claire Jensen. Claire had been awake feeding her 10-month-old daughter Lila, rocking the baby in the creaking chair beside the wood stove. The noise startled her so badly she spilled a bit of milk from the bottle and instinctively pulled Lila tighter against her chest. "What was that?" she whispered to herself, heart thudding. Lila didn't cry. She just blinked up at her mother with big, curious eyes like she too was listening. There were no more screams after that, just silence. But Claire had grown up in these woods. That sound hadn't come from a deer or a bear. It had been feline, wild, painful. Bobcat. She knew the sound because she'd once nursed a wounded one back to health when she was 16, years before she became a veterinary tech. She never forgot the sharp, desperate cry a bobcat made when it was hurt. Claire set the bottle down and stood, shifting Lila against her hip. She peeked out the window. The trees were still, bathed in mist and pale pink light. A quiet snowfall from the night before blanketed the ground in a clean hush. In the distance, the forest line waited, watching. Claire's husband, Jack, was still asleep upstairs. She debated waking him but decided against it. Not yet. Instead, she bundled Lila in her soft bear-ear hoodie, threw on her parka, and stepped out onto the porch. The cold hit her instantly, but Lila stayed warm against her chest, tucked into a carrier. The baby hummed softly, content. Claire listened. Nothing. Then, another sound. Fainter now. A whimper. Coming from deep behind the barn, down near the old logging trail that hadn't been used in years. Claire's pulse quickened. She didn't hesitate. It took her 15 minutes to make it to the clearing. She had to move carefully, balancing the baby and trudging through the snow. As she reached the crest of the hill, her breath caught in her throat. There, trapped between two trees, was a bobcat. A beautiful, dust-grey female with striking amber eyes and dark streaks across her coat. One front paw was clamped tight in a rusted steel trap, the kind illegal in most states but still used by a few old-timers who didn't care about wildlife laws. The cat was trembling, eyes wide, lips curled in pain, but when Claire stepped forward, she didn't lunge. She simply stared. Claire dropped to her knees slowly, murmuring, "Hey girl, it's okay. I'm not here to hurt you." Lila, to Claire's amazement, reached out her mittened hand toward the animal. "Kitty," she said with a babble. The bobcat's ears twitched. And then, something unbelievable happened. She stopped growling. The tension in her shoulders eased, just slightly. Claire's breath fogged the air. She couldn't believe it. The bobcat was responding to Lila's voice, to her presence. She opened her bag and pulled out a folded towel and her field kit, the same one she used for injured farm animals. She'd need to get the trap open and bandage the paw enough to transport the cat to the sanctuary near Cedar Ridge. But first, calm. "You're not dangerous, are you?" Claire whispered, locking eyes with the animal. "They just think you are." Lila cooed again. The bobcat blinked. And somehow, in that still moment between snowflakes and breath, the wild thing lying in the snow was no longer just a wounded predator. She was something more. Something watching, waiting, trusting. Claire moved slowly, gently reaching toward the trap mechanism. It would take strength, patience, and every ounce of courage she had. Because once she opened it, everything would change. The trap was old but brutal. A rusting, steel-jawed relic that should have been outlawed long ago. Jagged teeth clamped tight over the delicate joint of the bobcat's front leg. Blood stained the snow beneath her, dark and already beginning to freeze. Claire could barely look at it without wincing. But she didn't flinch. She lowered her bag beside the trap, whispering the whole time. Words of comfort meant more for herself than for the cat. Lila babbled softly in the sling against her chest, her warm breath puffing into the cold air. The bobcat's eyes flicked toward the sound. And again, no growl, no snarl. Just those wide amber eyes fixed on the baby, holding her gaze as if something sacred passed silently between them. Claire had worked with animals long enough to know this wasn't normal. A wild bobcat, especially one in pain, would usually thrash, bite, snarl. But this one, this girl, was still. Not tame, not broken, just aware. Like she knew. Claire gently reached forward, slipping her gloved fingers beneath the trap's rusty spring mechanism. It was stiff from the cold and stubborn from age. She pressed with all her weight, feeling its strain. Nothing. She adjusted her angle and pressed again. A click. Then, a groan of metal. The trap snapped open with a dull metallic pop, and the bobcat jolted but didn't run. She yanked her leg free and collapsed to the side, panting hard, the leg curling beneath her like it no longer belonged. Claire acted fast. She pulled a towel over the cat's body, carefully wrapping her with the practiced calm of someone who had done this dozens of times. The cat hissed once, weakly, but didn't resist. Lila reached down, her mitten brushing against the towel-covered fur. "Kitty," she said again, a whisper. The bobcat's ears swiveled, but she didn't move. Claire stared, her throat tight. She didn't dare believe what was happening, but every instinct in her told her one thing. The baby was keeping the animal calm. Somehow this wounded creature of the wild had decided the child was not a threat, but a lifeline. Claire didn't waste time. She slipped her field sling from her bag, a soft carrier built for transporting animals, and with shaking hands maneuvered the bobcat into it. It was like holding fire and snow all at once. Raw power, fragile trust. Before zipping the carrier closed, Claire met those eyes again. "I'm going to help you," she whispered. The bobcat blinked, then closed her eyes. They reached the house just after sunrise. Jack met her on the porch, sleep still in his eyes. "Claire, what the hell?" She brushed past him, breathless. "Get the truck ready. I'll explain on the way." He followed her inside, stunned as she set the carrier down on the kitchen floor, then unzipped it halfway. Jack leaned over. Is that a bobcat?" Claire nodded, already grabbing gauze and antiseptic from the cabinet. Jack looked at Lila, still calm in the sling, watching the carrier with fascination, and back at Claire. "Are you insane? She was caught in a trap behind the barn. She didn't attack, didn't even growl. She looked right at Lila and stayed calm." Jack blinked. Claire's voice dropped to a whisper. It's like she trusted her. At the Cedar Ridge Wildlife Center, Dr. Carla Bennett took one look at the bobcat's leg and shook her head. "She's lucky you got to her in time," she said, inspecting the swollen joint. "Another few hours and infection could have spread. We might still lose the leg." Claire stood silently beside the table, Lila pressed to her chest. The bobcat was sedated, but even in sleep, she looked powerful, regal, damaged, but not defeated. Carla continued. I've seen a lot of wild cats. They never let anyone this close, not unless they're totally broken down. Claire nodded. She let my baby touch her. Carla paused. Really? She didn't just allow it, she relaxed when Lila spoke. Carla glanced at the child who was quietly chewing her mitten and watching the sleeping animal with wide, unblinking eyes. That's not something I've ever seen, she admitted. We'll keep her here for observation, monitor the swelling, see how she responds to antibiotics. Claire hesitated, then asked, Can I come visit? Carla looked surprised. You want to keep seeing her? Claire glanced at Lila, who was now babbling softly to the sedated Bobcat. I think she already misses her. Back in Birch Hollow, word began to spread. Someone had found the Bobcat. It was Claire Jensen, of all people, the vet tech who lived on the old farm near the ridge. She'd carried the animal home. With her baby. Crazy, one man said at the gas station. Could have mauled the kid. They need to fine her, someone else muttered at the post office. Wild animal like that? It's dangerous. But there were others who didn't agree. Maybe she saved it for a reason, said old Mrs. Whitaker, who'd known Claire since she was a girl. Maybe that cat isn't what you think. In small towns, stories shift like wind in the trees. One moment it's danger, the next, it's miracle. Claire stayed quiet. She wasn't interested in rumors. She was only interested in one thing, whether the bond she'd witnessed was real. And whether, if given the chance, the wild could choose love over fear. The first visit was 2 days later. Claire had barely slept, waking every few hours to check the baby monitor, her dreams haunted by the sound of snapping metal and a flash of golden eyes. Lila, on the other hand, had slept peacefully every night since they returned from the wildlife center. More peacefully, Claire thought, than ever before. The moment they arrived at Cedar Ridge, Lila perked up. She remembers, Claire whispered. Inside, Dr. Bennett greeted them with a tired smile. She's stable, infection is receding, and she's eating again. Still won't let any of the techs near her, though. Only me. And even that's cautious. She led Claire and Lila to the observation wing, where the Bobcat was resting in a large recovery enclosure. The space was warm, padded with straw and thick blankets. A heat lamp glowed softly overhead. Claire's heart leapt. The cat, grey with flecks of gold, leg bandaged and swollen, was sitting up now, eyes open. And the moment she saw Lila, her head tilted, her ears flicked. Lila clapped once, delighted. Kitty, Claire chuckled, then hushed her gently. Soft voice, sweetie. Remember? They stood near the glass. The Bobcat slowly rose, limping but steady, and moved toward them. Not to Claire, to the baby. She sat just inches from the pane, her eyes fixed on Lila. Claire watched in awe. It was as if time folded in on itself. Two souls on opposite ends of the wild, one ancient and hunted, the other new and innocent, meeting in perfect understanding. She's never done that for anyone, Dr. Bennett whispered. Not once. Lila pressed her hand against the glass. The Bobcat mirrored her. It was a moment so pure, so striking, that Claire felt tears prick her eyes. She knows her, she whispered. It wasn't chance. It wasn't luck. That cat, she let us save her because of Lila. Dr. Bennett stared, silent. Back in Birch Hollow, the talk had grown louder. The local Facebook page had lit up after someone posted about Claire harboring a dangerous predator. The comments were split. She's got a baby in that house. What kind of mother brings home a wild cat? Claire Jensen's always been weird about animals. Too much trust, not enough caution. But then came the unexpected voice of reason, from none other than Walter Briggs, the town's retired fire chief. he commented. Claire once helped my shepherd walk again after a car accident. She didn't give up when no one else tried. If she says that cat's not a threat, I believe her. And just like that, the tide began to turn. People started paying attention, not judging it, just watching, waiting. Over the next week, Claire and Lila visited the center 3 more times. Each time the Bobcat, now lovingly called Ember by the staff, responded only to Lila. Claire watched as her daughter's presence soothed the creature in ways science couldn't explain. Ember would sit near the glass for hours, watching Lila play, humming softly, babbling to her in toddler speak. It was as if the Bobcat found comfort in the child's voice. The connection deepened. And on the 4th visit, Ember did something no one expected. Dr. Bennett opened the inner gate, just a sliver, with Claire seated inside in full safety gear, Lila tucked securely in her lap. I don't want contact, Bennett said firmly. Just see how she reacts. Ember padded forward. Her limp was improving. She didn't look at Claire. She looked at the child. Lila reached a hand forward. Claire held her breath. Ember leaned in and touched her nose to Lila's fingers. A hush fell over the room. Then slowly, Ember lay down, eyes half closed, calm, content. Dr. Bennett whispered, In all my years, I've never seen anything like this. Claire stared at her daughter, who looked down at the wild cat like she was looking at a friend. She doesn't see a predator, Claire said softly. She sees someone who needed help. That night, Claire and Jack sat on the couch, the fire flickering low. He looked at her, quiet for a long time. She really loves that cat. Claire nodded. And I think Ember loves her too. Are you thinking what I think you're thinking? Claire hesitated. I don't know. It's crazy. But maybe Ember isn't meant to go back into the wild. Jack raised an eyebrow. You're talking about keeping her? No, not like a pet. But maybe there's a different future for her. One where she stays near. One where she can be safe. One where she has Lila. Jack let out a slow breath. Then said, Let's see what the town thinks. The next morning, Claire posted a message to the community page. Ember, the bobcat caught in the trap behind our barn, is alive and healing. Many of you have asked why we helped her. Some have called us reckless, but I want to share something you haven't seen. A bond, a connection between a baby and a wild heart. If you'd like to understand, we're inviting you to meet her, with guidance and safety, this Saturday at Cedar Ridge. You'll see what we've seen, and maybe you'll believe it too. She hit post and exhaled. The town's eyes were now on them. What happened next would either bridge the gap between fear and understanding, or close it forever. Saturday morning arrived with bright skies and crisp mountain air. Claire stood outside Cedar Ridge Wildlife Center. Lila balanced on her hip, both bundled in soft knits and quiet anticipation. The baby tugged at her knit hat impatiently, her bright eyes locked on the trees that rimmed the center's outdoor enclosure. Claire had no idea how many people, if any, would actually show. But by 9 a.m., cars began pulling into the gravel lot. First, just a few, then more. By 10 a.m., over 30 people stood huddled in small groups outside the visitor center, scarves wrapped tight, eyes curious and guarded. Claire stepped forward, heart pounding. She recognized most of them. Mr. Riggs from the feed store, the high school biology teacher, the Parker twins, and their mum. Even Walter Briggs stood leaning on his cane, lips pressed into a thoughtful line. Claire cleared her throat. Thank you for coming. A few heads nodded. Someone murmured. We had to see this with our own eyes. I know a lot of you have questions, Claire said, holding Lila closer, and I get it. A bobcat in a baby's life. It sounds insane. I wouldn't believe it either, until I saw it. She gestured toward the enclosure, where Ember was resting beneath a pine tree, her bandaged leg tucked beneath her, calm and unmoving despite the crowd nearby. She was caught in an illegal trap, Claire continued, and I didn't go looking for her. I was holding Lila when we found her, and somehow she didn't see us as a threat. She didn't run, she didn't snarl. She watched my baby and Claire swallowed. It was like something passed between them, something I still can't explain. Jack appeared beside her, offering quiet support as Dr. Bennett came forward. "We'll be opening the viewing corridor in a few minutes," she announced. "But please remember, no flash photography, no sudden movements, and please remain behind the barrier. Ember is still a wild animal." Claire looked down at Lila. The baby was humming to herself and fiddling with the ribbon on her coat. "She's ready," Claire said quietly. The group was ushered in 2 or 3 at a time, moving slowly through the specially constructed corridor that lined the enclosure's edge. Ember remained motionless at first, watching, observing, but not retreating. When Claire and Lila entered, the room stilled. Lila leaned toward the plexiglass barrier, her face pressed gently to the window. "Kitty," she whispered, tapping the glass with her mitten. Ember stirred. Then, to the astonishment of everyone watching, she stood, slowly, limping but strong, and walked to the barrier. She sat, not in threat, not in fear, but in calm, deliberate presence. Lila giggled softly. The bobcat blinked. And in that moment, a hush fell over the crowd, not out of fear but reverence. The Parker twins gasped. Mrs. Whittaker pressed a hand to her chest. Walter Briggs shook his head in disbelief. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered. After the visit, a small group gathered near Claire. Their skepticism softened. "She really knew the baby," someone said. "That's not just instinct," another murmured. "That's something else." Claire turned toward the group. "This isn't about keeping a bobcat as a pet. It's about recognizing that sometimes the wild chooses peace. Ember made a choice that day. She trusted a baby." Walter leaned in. "What happens to her now?" Claire glanced toward Dr. Bennett. The vet cleared her throat. "She's healing well, but she can't be released far from here. She imprinted. She keeps returning to where she first saw the baby." "She remembers," Claire said. "She's not wild in the way we feared. She's bonded." There was silence for a beat. Then Mrs. Whittaker stepped forward. "So maybe we let her stay close. Maybe not as a pet, but as something else." Claire smiled. "A protector." Walter gave a half smile. "This town's never seen anything like this." "No," Claire said, "but maybe it's time we did." The next week, Claire sat on the porch swing, Lila beside her with her lunar stick tucked in one hand and a new drawing in the other. 2 stick figures, one small with pigtails, the other with pointy ears and a long tail. Behind the house, a special enclosure was being constructed with help from the Wildlife Center. A space on the edge of the forest where Ember could roam safely but stay close. A space open enough to remain free, protected enough to stay safe. The town had rallied. Donations came in. Volunteers offered time and tools. What started as skepticism had turned into something beautiful, understanding. Amelia held up her drawing. "Kitty lives with us." Claire nodded, tears brimming. "She lives near us, because she chose you." From the tree line, a soft rustle, golden eyes watching, waiting. And when Claire whispered, "She's here," Lila simply smiled, because she already knew. Spring came early that year, pushing aside the snow with soft winds and a chorus of new life. Claire watched the last frost melt from the fence posts as wildflowers dared to peek through the soil. The days were longer now, and everything, trees, birds, and even people, seemed to breathe easier. Especially Ember. The day her enclosure was finished, a quiet crowd gathered near the forest's edge. It wasn't a zoo habitat. It was more of a sanctuary, a compromise between wild and safe. It backed directly into the forest and was built with hidden gates that the wildlife team could open if Ember ever chose to leave for good. But she never did. She stayed. Dr. Bennett walked the perimeter with Claire, checking the fencing and final safety latches. It's more space than we usually give to injured rescues. But Ember's different. Claire nodded. She's never been caged. Not really. This isn't about keeping her in. It's about giving her a choice. Bennett smiled. You mean giving her Lila? Claire turned and saw her daughter toddling towards the enclosure, Luna stick clutched tight, humming a made-up tune as she walked barefoot through the soft grass. Ember was already waiting. She stood still, tail swaying gently, ears forward, eyes warm. Lila reached the fence and pressed her forehead to the wood slats. Hi, Kitty. Ember stepped forward and touched her nose gently to the gap. It had become their ritual. Every morning, every evening. As if Ember were checking in, as if she needed to see the little girl who had first freed her, not just from the trap, but from something deeper. From fear, from loneliness, from being misunderstood. Word of the sanctuary spread. An article appeared in the state newspaper, The Baby Who Tamed the Bobcat. A local news crew asked to film a segment. Even a wildlife documentary filmmaker reached out, curious about what they were calling an extraordinary interspecies bond. But Claire turned most of them down. This isn't a story for TV, she told one persistent reporter. It's not a headline, it's hers. She pointed to Lila. And to Ember. Not everyone agreed. One evening at the diner, Greg Mason, the same man rumored to have set the original trap, grumbled into his coffee. You all are playing with fire. That cat might be calm now, but give it time. Nature doesn't change. Claire sat a few booths away, trying not to listen. But Walter Briggs, seated across from Greg, leaned in and said, You're wrong about that. I've seen nature change plenty, especially when it's shown grace. Greg huffed, but said no more. And when Claire looked over at Walter later that night, he simply nodded. They understood each other now. The town had changed. Not just in opinion. In heart. That week, Lila drew a new picture. She had better control of crayons now, and her scribbles held more shape. In the center of the page was a little girl with pigtails, holding hands or paws with a grey and gold cat. Above them she'd scrawled the letters, Me Ember. Claire pinned it to the fridge and ran her fingers gently over the drawing. Outside, Ember sat in the dusk, watching the house. Like always, like a guardian. Then one day, Ember didn't come. Morning passed, afternoon crept in, evening fell. But she never showed. Lila waited by the fence, stick in hand. Where'd Kitty go? Claire tried to keep her voice steady. Maybe she went exploring, the forest is big. But her heart sank. The next day, still no sign. Then the third day passed, and the fourth. Dr. Bennett came to check the enclosure. No signs of struggle, no signs of escape. The outer gate hadn't been unlatched. There were no tracks near the tree line. She left on her own, Claire said quietly. She chose. Lila didn't cry. Instead, she laid her Luna stick gently on the ground near the fence. Come back soon, she whispered, and walked away. It would be nearly 2 weeks before they saw Ember again. It was early morning, the sky just beginning to blush pink, when Claire, sipping her coffee by the window, spotted a movement in the shadows. Her breath caught. Ember. She looked healthy, alert, her limp barely noticeable now. But she wasn't alone. Behind her, 2 tiny shapes followed. Kittens. Claire blinked away the tears. She rushed to Lila's room, scooped her from the bed and carried her to the window. There, she whispered. Look. Lila rubbed her eyes and pressed her face to the glass. Ember got babies. Claire nodded, smiling. She brought them home. Outside, Ember lifted her head, her golden eyes meeting Claire's. She held the gaze for a moment, then turned, her tail flicking, and padded silently back into the woods, her kittens following like shadows. Claire stood in awe, heart swelling, because she finally understood. Ember hadn't just left. She'd gone to build something, a family, a legacy. And somehow, even now, she wanted Claire and Lila to be part of it. The forest was alive again. Not just with birdsong and rustling leaves, but with quiet anticipation. Every morning, Claire found herself at the porch before sunrise, mug in hand, eyes scanning the tree line. Lila was always close behind, dragging her blanket and Luna stick, her voice still groggy but filled with hope. "See her yet, Mummy? Not yet, baby." But it wasn't disappointment that lingered in her tone. It was patience, belief, because Ember always came back. And now, she wasn't alone. The first few glimpses were fleeting, a flick of a tail behind a tree, a shadow darting beneath a fern. Claire saw the kittens more by suggestion than shape, tiny, shy, and perfectly camouflaged. But Lila always seemed to sense them. "There's two," she whispered one morning. "One grey, one stripy." Claire hadn't seen them clearly enough to know, but she didn't question it. Lila was rarely wrong when it came to Ember. One day Claire walked out to the sanctuary enclosure and found something odd. Near the gate where Lila often sat to sing or draw, a perfectly round rock had been placed, grey with a strange swirl running through it like smoke. It hadn't been there the day before. Claire knelt beside it and smiled. Another gift. Another silent exchange. Ember wasn't just visiting. She was still communicating, leaving pieces of the forest behind as if to say, "We're okay, we remember, we're close." That same day, Claire brought out a bowl of water and left it near the tree line, not to feed, not to interfere, just to offer comfort. That night, it was empty. Weeks passed like water. The town slowly adapted to the new normal. People who once grumbled about that wild cat now whispered about Ember with reverence. "She came back with kittens, you know," Mrs. Whitaker told her hairdresser. "They say the baby talks to her," said a cashier at the co-op. The legend was growing, but Claire didn't feed it. She kept quiet. Let Ember's truth speak for itself. One afternoon, something unexpected happened. Claire was out in the garden with Lila, tending to the first sprouts of the season, when a truck pulled into the gravel driveway. It was Dr. Bennett. She stepped out, her face unreadable. "I had a call," she said, "from a sanctuary in Oregon. They're offering to take Ember and her kittens permanently. A protected reserve, huge space, no hunting, no traps. It's a good place." Claire's heart dropped. Lila looked up from the dirt, clutching a small dandelion. "Ember?" Dr. Bennett nodded. Claire's voice was tight. "But she's already home." "I know," Dr. Bennett said softly, "and I told them that. But I had to bring it to you. It's protocol." Claire glanced at the woods. She imagined Ember there, crouched somewhere between bramble and birch, watching. She didn't speak for a long time. Then, "She's not ready to go, and neither are we." Dr. Bennett nodded. "Okay, but if that ever changes, they'll be ready." That evening, Claire sat with Lila on the porch. The sky glowed orange, and the wind carried the scent of pine and soil. "Mommy," Lila whispered, "if Ember leaves again, will she remember me?" Claire looked down, brushing a curl from her daughter's cheek. "She'll never forget you." Lila nodded, content. And in the distance, between the shadows of tall trees, two glowing eyes flickered. Watching, still near. The next morning brought a gift like no other. On the porch, laid carefully beside Lila's rubber boots, was a large feather, black with silver tips, long and gleaming. Lila squealed with delight. "Mommy, look! Ember left this!" Claire turned the feather over in her hands, marveling at how perfect it was. "She did," she whispered. It felt sacred, like a mark of thanks, or perhaps a blessing. From mother to mother. Wild heart to human soul. That afternoon, Claire wrote a letter she hadn't expected to write. Not to a sanctuary, but to the editor of the town newspaper. She called it, "The Baby, the Bobcat, and the Bond That Changed Us." In it, she shared the full story. The trap, the rescue, the connection between child and cat, the return, the trust, and the lesson. "We feared what we didn't understand, but my daughter didn't. She saw Ember not as a threat, but as someone who needed help, and that trust changed a wild heart, and ours too." The piece was published that Sunday, and by Monday the paper had to print extra copies. Claire found herself on the porch more often after that. Not waiting, just being. And every so often, when the sun dipped low and shadows stretched long, she'd see them. Ember, her kittens, at the edge of the woods, watching, always watching. And she'd whisper, "Thank you for coming back." Because Ember had never been lost. She was just finding her way. Summer arrived in a burst of green and warmth. The trees stood proud in full leaf, and the river behind the ridge flowed faster with melted snow. Life in Birch Hollow found a new rhythm, one that now included stories of a bobcat who loved a baby and a community transformed by grace. Claire stood barefoot in the garden, plucking ripe cherry tomatoes with one hand while balancing a baby monitor in the other. Lila, now nearly 2, had fallen asleep after lunch. She'd grown tall and steady, but her bond with Ember hadn't changed a bit. Each morning she'd press her hands to the porch rail and call softly, "Ember, come see me." Sometimes the bobcat came. Sometimes she didn't. But when she did, Lila would run in excited circles and sing nonsense songs, while Ember lounged under a shaded tree, her golden eyes blinking slowly in calm approval. The kittens, now lanky adolescents, were shyer but curious. They mimicked Ember's every move, especially her calmness near Lila. Claire once watched in awe as one of them stalked a rabbit, stopped midway and turned towards the child's laughter instead. He didn't chase the rabbit, he simply sat, just like his mother had done once. Something was being passed down. Not just survival, but trust. One afternoon, Claire received an unexpected visit from Mayor Kelly Reed. The mayor stood at the gate in her signature wide-brimmed hat and linen jacket, smiling as if she already knew the answer to a question she hadn't asked. "Mind if I come in?" Claire led her to the porch where they sipped iced tea and listened to the breeze rustling through the birch trees. Mayor Reed spoke gently. "There's a wildlife education grant available this fall. State funding. I think Birch Hollow has the perfect story for it." Claire raised a brow. "You mean Ember?" "I mean what Ember represents," the mayor said. "Understanding, harmony, teaching children how to respect the wild, not fear it. That bond your daughter shares, it could inspire more than just headlines." Claire leaned back. "And what exactly are you proposing?" "A community program. You lead it. We bring local kids, families, even tourists. Teach them about coexisting with wildlife. What happened here isn't just rare, it's powerful. Let's use it." Claire hesitated. Part of her wanted to say no, to keep Ember's visits quiet and sacred, unspoiled by too many eyes. But another part of her, deep in her chest, knew it was time to share, to expand the gift they'd been given, to build something that could protect not just Ember and her kittens, but other creatures like her. She nodded slowly. "On one condition." The mayor waited. "We don't turn Ember into a spectacle. No cages, no posters, no tours. We honor her story, and Lila's." The mayor smiled. "That's exactly what I had in mind." That evening, Claire told Lila about the idea. They were watching the sunset together, Lila seated in Claire's lap, both wrapped in a light shawl. The sky blushed pink and orange. "There might be more kids coming soon, sweetheart," Claire said softly, "to learn about Ember, about how you helped her." Lila tilted her head. "I teach them?" Claire smiled. "If you want to." Lila thought a moment, then nodded. "But only if Ember says it's okay." Claire chuckled. "We'll ask her." They got their answer the very next morning. On the porch beside Lila's watering can lay another offering, a feather, longer than the last, dark with a snowy white tip, and a smooth stone with 3 tiny claw marks across it. Claire picked it up carefully. Lila whispered. She said yes. And in the trees, golden eyes blinked once, then vanished into the green. Construction began the following month. Not on cages or viewing pens, but on a learning pavilion tucked against the forest's edge. It had benches made from reclaimed timber, handmade signs about local flora and fauna, and a mural in progress of Ember and Lila, painted by local high schoolers. Claire began hosting small workshops with the help of Dr. Bennett and other wildlife specialists. Children listened wide-eyed as they heard how Ember had once been caught in a trap, and how a baby's innocence had saved her. They passed around pictures of tracks, feathers and fur, and sometimes, if they were lucky, Ember watched from a distance, hidden in shadow. Her presence felt more than seen. And every now and then, she'd emerge, silent, patient, whole. Late one evening, as fireflies blinked across the yard, Claire sat on the porch swing with Lila curled beside her. A soft rustling caught her attention. Ember. She stepped from the trees alone, her kittens now grown and likely roaming nearby. She moved slowly like the queen of her territory, unthreatened and unafraid. She approached the porch, sat at the base of the steps, and met Claire's eyes. There were no sounds, just the hum of summer and the beating of hearts. Then, to Claire's amazement, Ember did something she'd never done before. She lay down, head on paws, like she belonged. Lila stirred, opening sleepy eyes. "Kitty?" Claire nodded. "She's here." Lila stood, toddled to the top step, and sat cross-legged, staring down at her old friend. They didn't touch. They didn't need to, because everything had already been said. The summer slipped into a golden lull, the kind that only comes to quiet towns nestled against old woods. The learning pavilion at the edge of the property had become more than an educational site. It was now a symbol. Local school groups scheduled weekly visits. Parents brought their children on weekends. A nature club sprouted up, led by the high school science teacher who organized weekend hikes and wildlife observation stations. And all the while, Ember remained the unseen, silent presence behind it all. Claire never forced her into view, but somehow, Ember always knew. She showed up on the mornings when children sat on the benches, and Claire told the story of the bobcat who waited and the baby who helped her heal. Not always close, but near enough that the teachers whispered, "There she is," and the kids gasped with wide-eyed wonder. The story was alive now, not just told, but lived. One Saturday, the town hosted its first Wild Neighbor Day, a community event at the pavilion with games, nature walks, and storytelling circles. Claire stood on the small wooden stage with Lila by her side, the little girl clutching her lunar stick proudly like a badge of honor. "This is the place where something beautiful happened," Claire said, her voice carrying into the crowd. "A wild heart was saved, not with fear or cages, but with compassion, and by a baby too young to know fear." The crowd stood in respectful silence. Claire looked down at her daughter. "And she's still teaching us what it means to listen, and to love something exactly as it is." Lila gave a shy wave and whispered into the mic, "Ember's my friend." The audience broke into soft smiles and claps. But the most stunning moment came minutes later. Just as the crowd began to disperse toward the games and booths, a ripple of excitement spread through the children at the back of the gathering. Heads turned, fingers pointed, gasps fluttered like leaves. And then Ember. She had emerged from the woods, not charging, not hiding, just walking, graceful, proud, alone. She stood just inside the shadow line of the trees and sat, watching. The kids froze. Then, slowly, as if guided by instinct, they sat down on the grass. A dozen little ones cross-legged in silence, staring in awe at the wild queen they'd only seen in drawings and storyboards. Claire's heart swelled. This wasn't just a visit. It was permission, recognition, a gift. That evening, Claire walked with Lila down the forest path as fireflies lit their way. They stopped near the old sanctuary gate, now left open, more symbolic than functional. Lila leaned against her mother's side, thoughtful. "She came close today," the girl said. "Did you see?" "I did," Claire said. "She was showing everyone she's not afraid anymore." Lila looked up. "Will she stay forever?" Claire smiled softly. "Maybe not forever, but I think part of her will always be here." The trees rustled softly, as if agreeing. Later that week, Claire received a letter from the Oregon Sanctuary again. They had read the newspaper article, seen the photos, heard the story. They weren't asking to relocate Ember anymore. Instead, they offered a partnership. They wanted to feature Ember's story in a national awareness campaign on coexistence between people and predators. They asked for Claire's input, for Lila's artwork, for the story of Birch Hollow. And more than anything, they asked to listen. Claire wrote back that evening. "Thank you for believing in her now. For once, the wild didn't need to be rescued. It just needed to be understood." The next morning, Claire found something on the porch. A pine cone, like the very first. Beside it, a piece of old ribbon, frayed, familiar. It was from the baby blanket Lila had dropped almost a year ago in the woods. Claire picked it up and pressed it to her heart. She didn't cry. She just smiled. Ember remembered. That night, as the stars came out in clusters over the valley, Claire and Lila sat on the porch steps wrapped in a blanket. A soft breeze rolled over the grass. Lila asked, "Can I tell her good night?" Claire nodded. And so the little girl stood, faced the woods, and called out in a voice full of wonder, "Good night, Ember, love you." From the trees, a low rustle, a soft, steady blink of golden eyes in the dark. Then silence. But in that silence, peace. Autumn crept in quietly, brushing the edges of the trees with flame and gold. The air turned crisp, the nights a little longer, and the stars a little sharper in the clear mountain sky. It had been nearly a year since Ember was found in the trap. Since Lila's soft babble and fearless gaze had soothed a wild heart. Since everything in Birch Hollow changed. Claire marked the anniversary without ceremony. No speeches or celebrations. Just a quiet morning on the porch, a warm cup of tea in her hands, and Lila curled up in a blanket beside her, humming to herself as she coloured. The drawing was of a forest. Tall trees, a little girl, a bobcat with a crown. Claire raised a brow. A crown? Lila grinned. Because Ember's the forest queen. Claire chuckled. She is, isn't she? From across the field, a breeze stirred the fallen leaves. And from the tree line, a shape emerged. Not close, not fast, but unmistakable. Ember. She stood for a long while, her fur blowing gently in the wind. Then she turned and disappeared again as quickly as she had come. Claire placed a hand on Lila's back. She came to visit. Lila nodded knowingly. She always knows. At the town council's request, Claire was invited to speak at the county's annual conservation summit. It was a chance to share the story not just with their region, but with educators, policymakers, and wildlife professionals from across the state. Claire wasn't one for stages, but she said yes. When she took the microphone, she looked out over the crowd and paused. Then she began, "I'm not a wildlife expert. I'm not a researcher. I'm a mother. And one morning, my baby crawled toward a trapped bobcat and changed both of their lives forever. We didn't tame her. We didn't teach her anything. We just gave her the chance to be more than a headline, and she gave us everything in return." She told them about the sanctuary, about the ribbon on the porch, about the kittens, about the gift of trust. The room was silent when she finished. Then came the applause. Not polite, not forced, but full. Real. Afterward, a woman in a forest ranger's uniform approached her. "Thank you," she said, "for reminding us that coexistence isn't just possible, it's necessary." Claire smiled. "It begins with one act of kindness." That winter, Ember vanished for a stretch of days, longer than usual. Claire tried not to worry, but unease crept in. The snow had fallen early and heavy. Predators were more active. The forest, though beautiful, could still be cruel. Then one morning Claire opened the front door and froze. There in the snow, right at the edge of the porch, was a perfectly round circle of trampled grass. In the center, a patch of fur, pale grey, not from injury or violence, from nesting. And beside it, tiny tracks. Claire knelt down, heart thudding. Kittens. New ones. Ember had returned to the edge of safety to bring life into the world again, to lay her young where it all began. Lila came toddling out in her boots, saw the circle, and gasped. "She brought babies again." Claire pulled her close. "Yes," she whispered, "because she knows this is home." Throughout the winter, Ember came and went. The older kittens, now nearly full-grown, began venturing further on their own. Sometimes Claire would catch sight of them crossing the ridge trail or perched on a rock bathed in moonlight like silent sentinels. But Ember always returned, never stayed long, never needed to. She wasn't a pet. She was something wilder, something freer, something eternal. The community began to refer to her with reverence, the Hollow Queen. People left food offerings in the woods, not to lure her, but to thank her. Children wrote her letters. Hikers left smooth stones on stumps and logs, tiny altars of gratitude. Even the skeptics had quieted, because no matter what they believed, none could deny what they'd seen. A bobcat, once bleeding and trapped, had become a guardian, a teacher, a legend. On Lila's 3rd birthday, Claire planned a small gathering. Just family, a few close neighbors, cake, laughter. But the real gift came later, after the last guest had left and twilight blanketed the world in velvet. From the woods came a rustle. Claire opened the back door and gasped. Ember stood near the tree line. Beside her, 2 tiny, unsteady shapes. Kittens. New ones. And in Ember's mouth, a branch. Thin, carved. Claire recognized it immediately. It was Lila's original lunar stick, chewed, polished by teeth and time, and returned. Lila ran to the porch, eyes wide. Ember gently dropped the stick in the snow. Then she turned and vanished with her young into the trees. Claire knelt beside Lila and picked it up. The wood was smooth, worn, carried across seasons. A message without words. I remember. I honor. I give back. Claire looked at her daughter, who was now holding the stick with both hands. "What did she say, Mummy?" Lila asked softly. Claire smiled, tears welling. She said thank you. Spring bloomed like a hymn across Birch Hollow, unfurling blossoms in every corner of the forest. The town had long since stopped asking if Ember would return. They simply waited, trusted, and knew. For Claire and Lila, life had taken on a deeper rhythm, slower, rooted, sacred. Their mornings often began the same. Lila at the porch rail, her Luna stick beside her, humming softly into the wind. Claire with a mug of coffee, watching the trees with a knowing smile. Sometimes Ember came. Sometimes only her prince did. But always, her presence lingered. It lived in the hush of the woods, in the scratch of branches against the roof at night, in the way Lila's eyes sparkled whenever she told her story. That story, their story, had now travelled far beyond Birch Hollow. Claire never sought the attention, but word spread. Articles, interviews, a short documentary filmed tastefully by a conservation non-profit titled Where the Wild Waited, A Child's Bond with the Forest Queen. The footage was simple. Claire reading from her journal. Lila drawing a picture of Ember with her new kittens. Soft, quiet glimpses of Ember moving through the woods, caught on trail cameras Claire had hidden along the forest's edge. And one powerful moment, captured by chance. Lila, standing at the gate of the original sanctuary enclosure, whispering to the trees. "Hi, Ember, you're doing good, I know." The video went viral. Not for shock value, but for how still it made people feel, as if they'd been reminded of something they forgot they were missing. That summer, the sanctuary welcomed visitors from other towns, teachers, scientists, parents with children in tow. One little boy who had never spoken a word in public turned to his mother after seeing Ember's claw-marked stone in the education cabin and whispered, "She's not scary. She's pretty." A veteran who suffered from PTSD visited the forest trail where Ember was often seen. Afterward, he wrote in the guest book, "This place, it heals things I didn't know were still broken." One afternoon, as the sun spilled gold across the porch, Claire sat with Lila in her lap, combing her fingers through her daughter's soft curls. "Do you remember the first time you met Ember?" she asked. Lila nodded. "She was hurting, and I wasn't scared." Claire pressed a kiss to her temple. "That's because you knew something the rest of us had to learn. That kindness is stronger than fear." Lila looked up, thoughtful. "Will she always live in the woods?" Claire smiled. "Maybe. Or maybe one day she'll go somewhere new, but she'll always carry us with her. And we'll always carry her." Years passed. Lila grew. The story remained. And Ember? She was seen less frequently, but her legacy only deepened. The kittens she raised had grown strong and wise. Claire spotted one once, standing tall on a rock above the ridge, tail curled high, surveying the valley like a sentinel. It wasn't Ember, but it was her child, her legacy. Her wild heart passed forward. On the 10th anniversary of the day Claire and Lila found Ember in that cruel trap, the town of Birch Hollow unveiled a bronze sculpture at the edge of the sanctuary pavilion. It showed a toddler girl, hand outstretched, and beside her, a sleek bobcat sitting with its head bowed low, as if in eternal gratitude. The plaque beneath read, "Where the wild waited, in memory of trust, in honor of what was healed." Lila stood before it, now nearly a teenager, still clutching the same smoothed Luna stick she'd been given as a toddler. "I remember everything," she whispered. Claire placed her hand gently over her daughter's. "So does she." That night, under a full moon, Claire walked the trail behind the barn, the place it had all begun. The trap was long gone, the blood washed away by time. But the memory remained. A single pine cone sat at the base of the old stump. Fresh. Intact. Left with care. Claire knelt, tears blurring her vision. She picked it up and held it to her heart. And from deep in the woods, like a memory wrapped in fur and starlight, came the softest rustle. Not a farewell, just a reminder. Ember was there, still watching, still guarding, still home. She came to them bleeding, trapped, feared by all, but through the eyes of a baby, innocent and unafraid, she found freedom, trust, and a family. Ember, the bobcat, didn't just survive. She became a guardian, a symbol, a legend. And in her silent way, she taught an entire town to see with their hearts instead of their fear. If this story moved you, please like this video and subscribe to Pawprints Forever for more unforgettable true stories like this. We'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment and tell us, have you ever shared a bond with an animal that changed your life? And don't forget to share this story with someone who needs a reminder that love has no boundaries, even between the wild and the innocent.